So, Mr. Schneider,
Yes.
you graduated in 1948,
Yes, I did.
and did you really have any plans for after high school?
The situation was this way: the day after we graduated, if your dad worked at the furniture factory in Kiel, you automatically went down there the next day and you had a job. You didn't have to fill out an application or anything. You just got in there and you told them who you were and they put you to work. And that was it.
That was the plan.
That was the plan, yes.
So, but then, compared to today, how was life in Kiel different?
It was altogether different. There's no comparison that you kids put up with now that we did. Everything we did was different, altogether different.
Like how? Can you list some examples?
Well, the Depression was on, and I was born at Rockville. And this is the house that I was born in. This is the church I went to, and it was it was altogether different living. We lived through the Depression, and everything was. There was no money. There was no money. Nobody had any money. And in 1936, I was 6 years old and was one of the coldest winters on record. And we were on a farm, and my dad lost the farm in the Depression. So he went to work at a place, was Elvin Poggle's gravel pit. He shoveled gravel all day long for 50 cents, and he stayed right at the owner that had the gravel pit, and he stayed there. So I hardly ever got to see my dad, but they moved us over to my grandmother's farm, and I was raised by my grandmother. She was an Indian, a real Indian, and we lived off the land. I have some pictures here of when I was a kid. Very seldom they took a picture of you because they didn't have cameras like they do now. There was no TV, there was no radio. In fact, on the farm that I grew up on, the electric line first came through when I was a junior in high school. And I was fortunate I could go to high school because most of the kids didn't go, especially the farm boys, because they had to work on the farm. And the winter in '36 was so cold that snow held the horses. We went cross lots. We hauled our milk to the cheese factory, which was about 2 miles away. It's the place where Bobby Schnell lived. I lived on a farm on Steinthal Road, and we went cross lots, and it was. I measured it off here a while back. It was 3 7/10 miles that we went to school. There was no kindergarten. School was different those days too. It was so cold in school, and we had to keep our lunch buckets. We didn't have lunch buckets like the kids do nowadays. We had like an old syrup pail, and that was our lunch bucket. And I was pretty fortunate because I had syrup for my bread, and that's all we had. We didn't have meat in our sandwiches or anything like that. And when it was time to eat, you got your lunch bucket in. You could eat inside the school, the classroom, which were pretty cold even, and the sandwiches were frozen. It was like they were really frozen solid, and kids used to. I had an old syrup pail, which most of the guys did, and some kids would kick them around. They'd be all dented up, and then when you got home afterwards, then you'd take a hammer or something and get them back in shape again for the next day. And school wasn't very warm. In fact, they would turn the bubbler off, keep it from the water freezing in school, and the janitor would come about once an hour and flush the toilets so that the water wouldn't freeze in. And it was it was really, I mean, the girls used to cry once in a while because they were so cold in school. And at that time, we had these desks with the ink wells in. I don't know if you remember them. They had a hole in them, with the slats on the bottom. And in winter, they would take those those ink wells, the glass, out of there because it would freeze once in a while, right in class. And it was kind of rough going because on the farm, I never heard anybody speak English. So when I got to school, I didn't understand what the nuns were saying because I couldn't understand English. And when we went to Mass on Sunday, that was Latin. So I never heard English. And then this nun would tell us different things, and I didn't know what she was talking about. It was just like if you'd go to someplace and hear some maybe Hmongs talking, or maybe kids all know Spanish maybe, but anyway, it was like a strange place altogether.
What language did you learn growing up?
German.
Okay.
I couldn't speak it. My grandmother and everybody else in the family always spoke German, so I never heard English until I got to school. So that was my downfall in one way, because Sister Jean said that must have said something that we weren't supposed to take a drink after recess. You marched in and you walked in front of the nun, and I took a drink out of the bubbler. This was in summer, when school started. She hit me over the head with a book and knocked my front tooth out. So I mean, it was rough going because I couldn't understand that. But other than that, grade school was I didn't appreciate it because we had a walk in the morning. We walked in the morning and we walked at night. And then by the time I got home at night, school left out at 3:30. When I walked in the house, my grandma had a towel there. And you got to dry the dishes. I mean, that's the way it was. And there was no electricity. We did all our homework with a kerosene lamp. And that's how we milked the cows in the morning too. And a lot of times you would get a ride with the sled or the buggy when they took the milk to the cheese factory. And then from there, from the cheese factory, we had to walk another 2 miles to school then. And a lot of times you get a ride home too they come with a load of feed being ground or something here with the big sleigh and the horses, or else you walk. So it was, you learn to walk and you learn to live off the land. I brought a bar of soap along. Soap was made out of ashes and lye. That's how they made, this is homemade soap. Now this piece here that I have was made either in maybe 39 or 1940, so it's pretty old already. And if you said the wrong thing once in a while, Grandma would take a chunk and wash your mouth out with it, And it was actually poison, really, but it did the trick. Okay.
It's got some weight behind it.
You'll notice nothing's grown on it in those 70 years.
Yeah, right. I have a box full in my garage. I have a whole box full of that soap. Yeah, and that soap was used for everything that you needed soap for. Okay, and we didn't have running water or anything, so we had a engine on a pump down in what we called a pump house, and then the water would be brought up and poured into a 50-gallon stone crock, and that was our drinking water, and then water for cooking and everything else. And you had a pail standing on the cupboard, and you had a dipper in it. Everybody drank out of the same dipper, out of the same pail. It was we all made it too. We didn't have to worry about all this. What do you call all this crap that? You got to sanitize everything, and nothing was sanitized. It was different. And the old summer kitchen is where we butchered in there, and a lot of times we lived in the summer kitchen in summer when it was so hot. But our house, I was pretty fortunate. We had a big old stone house because there was all rocks and stones were all there, and the walls were 2.5 feet thick. Once you had them warm, it stayed warm. But then we had an old stove that my grandma would get up early in the morning and get the fire going in the kitchen. And there was like a reservoir on the side of it. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about, but that heated water. It wasn't real hot water, but it was warm enough. And that's what you use. And for taking a bath, Saturday night they'd stick you in a big old wash tub, and that's where you got your bath. And in summer, you went out in the cow tank and took a bath out there, and you used some of this soap. And the cows didn't like to drink the water afterwards because you had in the cow tank, it was soapy water. And then on this old stove in winter, so there was no heat upstairs. But anyway, I had a pet rock. It was as big as what I could carry. And I put that on that old cook stove and heat that up. And then when we went to bed at night, you wrapped a towel around it and took it upstairs and went to bed with it, and it kept your feet nice and warm once you were in it. You know? And like our quilts and stuff were made out of, well, even our pillows had corn straw in it, you know, from husking corn. From when you husk corn, you took the stuff off of it, and that was used for pillows and also for your big quilt. And your quilt was maybe that deep, but it once you were in it, it was warm. It insulated good. And I remember one winter in '36 when the weather was so cold. And the snow was so deep that we crawled up the upstairs window, and the snow held us. And then, in order to get to the barn, we tunneled underneath, and then we put the snow in like big old wash baskets that they had years ago, and carried it out that way. And or else you put it in the barn, but it didn't melt very fast in the barn either. So, and we milked by hand. We milked 22 cows, and that was a big herd for those days. Without, you know, you milked them by hand. And then in summer you took the milk cans and you put them in the water tank to cool, and then haul them to the cheese factory. And then from the cheese factory, we brought the cans back with whey. It was a byproduct of milk, you know, and that's what we fed the pigs with. And we had pigs, chickens, cows, and horses. We had some horses that were just mostly for on the buggy for when you wanted to go to town in a hurry or something. We had some horses that could gallop most of the way, and then we had some that were just for draft horses for pulling. We had one tractor, and that was for belt power for filling a silo. But that's the only tractor. It was old hard part. It was the only tractor we had. It was just for belt power, for trashing and stuff. We excuse me. We hauled the grain, the oats, barley, whatever, into a barn, and then there was one man in the neighborhood had a trash machine, and they went from farmer to farmer and trashed, and like when the weather got colder, they would be trashing, and then it would be blown out through the blower out on a straw stack. I don't remember what a straw stack is, but anyway, you used to have a big stack in the back in the barn, and outside of the barn, that was all straw for bedding and stuff. And then in winter, when you took a wheelbarrow or whatever and brought it in, you had what we call a hay hook, and you pulled it down. And my job was usually being on a straw stack, and I just loved that. But once in a while, you almost got blown off because of the force of the blower blowing the straw out there, and it was quite high. Some of them were maybe 20, pretty wide. And I always loved that job because whoever was the stack man always got a pint of whiskey. And I was maybe 10 years old, and that was pretty good stuff for me. And dirtier than heck, but that was my life on the farm.
Yeah, times are pretty different back then, especially compared to now.
Yes, they were, yeah. And everything was done by hand, especially in our area because there was no electricity. So, yeah, it's a different way of living altogether. And it was, then, when I think I was, just before I was a freshman in high school, we moved to town, to Kiel, right into Kiel. And things were different, and I went to high school. I was lucky I went to high school. And I enjoyed high school. I had, I don't know how I can explain it, but I was different in those days. Of course, I'm different now too. But anyway, our janitor was a gunsmith. Lester Lutz was his name. And in the morning, me and I myself and Harvey Kingbaum, there were 3 stokers down in the furnace room, and a real big coal bin. It must have been, well, it could hold, I think, 4 or 5 semi-loads of coal. And we would shovel those stokers every morning before school and fill the 3 stokers. And each one of us got paid a quarter. And we each shoveled about a half a ton. So we shoveled about a ton of coal in the morning before school. And then we could take our 22s down there, and we always shot 22s down there. We had set up in the coal bin we shot. They could never hear it upstairs in school. And we used to, those days you didn't have to have your gun in your rifle in a gun case. Nobody ever heard of a gun case those days. And we used to keep them in our locker once in a while. And, you know, nobody said anything, nobody did anything. I mean, it was normal. Then we'd go down there and shoot our 22s in between class and stuff like that. And they couldn't hear it upstairs, so everything was okay. And then I enjoyed school too, because we had one guy by the name of Herbie Garlop. He always had a gallon of cider in his locker, hard cider, you know, real, yeah, the hard stuff. So we had some pretty good times, and he was the most popular guy around because everybody always the boys that congregated around his locker, because we always, every day he'd bring another gallon of cider, and it was all right. And then I got into, well, it wasn't really trouble once in a while, but I had a guy by the name of Skinny Oslos sitting ahead of me in math class, and he would always shoot like marbles at the clock, you know, this old regulator clock. And he was sitting in front of me, and then Adra Leon was, Adra was her name, and she was like, she wasn't real friendly, let me put it that way, but I got along with her. But anyway, one time he was shooting marbles at this clock, and it would really crack pretty loud, and one time he broke the glass in it. And Adra Leon come down the aisle, and she says, "Who broke the glass in the clock?" Nobody said anything. And just before she come down to me, and Skinny was sitting ahead of me, he took his slingshot and threw it on my desk just when she was coming down the aisle. So, okay, Mr. Schneider, up to Mr. Rowden's office again. So I got to see Mr. Rowden, and I got to be pretty good friends afterwards, because I was in there so often. And they'd say, "When are you ever going to settle down?" And I said, "Well, settle down to what?" You know, I was settling. I was sitting in my seat and stuff like that. You know. But a lot of times I had him kind of smiling and laughing by the time he was done chewing me out. So, but other than that, I had my Ford car. I've got a picture of that somewhere's in here. I have my Ford car that I was lucky. This is a picture of my car, and this is a picture of me as a freshman in high school. But that was a nice little car. Anyway, the reason I could buy a car, well, there was, I think, 5 of us that had cars at school. And the reason I could afford a car, insurance was $15 a year. and gasoline was, I think, 26 cents, something like that. And this old Ford could go 30 miles to a gallon. But anyway, from shoveling coal in the morning, then I worked at the Riverside Grocery, which is not there anymore. I think it used to have a big dungeon underneath the hill. It was on the east, way on the east side of Kiel. I got 25 cents an hour, so I worked there from 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock every day. And then I went to the bowling alley, which is still there yet, but I think it's closed. Was right on the main drag, right across from well, St. Peter and Paul Church. Just west of there was a bowling alley, and we set up pins. Those days you picked them up by hand and you put them in a rack, and then you pulled the rack down. And we got 7 cents for every game that somebody bowled. So I had money. I mean, I wasn't rich, but I had enough money to buy gas. And then right after, the day after we graduated, we went down to the furniture factory, and you had a job. And after that, from the job I had, I worked there about a year, and I was getting 33 cents an hour. And at that time, Hart Carter in the Holstein was paying 58 cents an hour. So I quit my job at the furniture factory, and we made this Sport King outboard motor at Lawson. It was called Lawson at that time. It was called Tecumseh later on. But anyway, Lawson Manufacturing was the place that I worked. And my father was so irate or upset with me that he showed me the door. So I lived in my car. And there was 5 of us that lived in their cars, and we could take the city hall was never locked. I don't know if they even had a key for it. It was never locked. And you could take a shower, like once a week you'd take a shower down there, and you could change clothes or whatever, and you could even wash your clothes once in a while. But I'd sneak home because my dad said the door is shut for you, okay? So I lived in my car. But anyway, that's where I met the girl that I married. It was actually a pretty good place to work. I enjoyed my job, and I was only there a little while, and then Uncle Sam called me. So we thought, well, what the heck? We had to register for the draft, and when we were 18, and every boy had to register, and we went to Manitowoc. We registered there, and we thought, well, there's no problem. The war is over with. The Second World War was over with in 45 and 46, and here this was 1950. Okay, but anyway, nothing to worry about. Yeah, a couple of months later, I found out I was taking basic training at the Indiantown Gap. Not old enough to have a beer or a boat or anything, but.
So when you received your draft letter, how did your friends and family react?
My friends, they didn't care, you know. I didn't have friends like a lot of kids do nowadays. I wasn't just a loner, but I think my dad was glad I was going because he said goodbye, and that was it. You know, I stopped home and told him I was leaving, and that was it then. And then we got on a bus. They took us to Manitowoc. From Manitowoc, they took us to Milwaukee. From Milwaukee, they took us to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, where they gave us our Army clothes and stuff. And then we went on a troop train up to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And that's where we learned the nitty-gritty of what life was really about.
So how did you react to getting drafted?
I didn't mind it. I mean, I would have had a place to sleep, and I had 3 meals a day, and they gave me our clothes. It was, well, I didn't just love it, you know, but it was good for me. Because at those days, then I wasn't afraid of anybody, because, I mean, we were taught combat, and it was rough going. And we heard that Korea had hills just like the mountains in Pennsylvania, and that's where we trained. Except that when we were training, every time you had to dig a foxhole, it was like you were black, really black. It was like a shale, what we call shale coal. It was like coal, and that's what it was in the mountain where there were coal mines around there and stuff. And a lot of times, if you dug a foxhole, the people living around it, there were people living right around the base all over. They were civilians, and they were just living there, trying to live off the land. And if you dug a foxhole, a lot of times by the next day, the coal that you dug out was gone because the people used it for their homes, for heat. But it was good training.
Okay. So on your first day of basic, what were like the emotions you felt? Were you excited? Were you nervous?
No, I wasn't nervous because I thought I could. I used to say I can eat this shit up, I can handle it, But I didn't like it, but because it'd get us up out any hour of the night, just I don't know if it was just to harass you or get out there and stand formation or whatever. And it didn't make a difference. You slept whenever you had time. Let me put it that way. If you had time, you tried to sleep, and if you weren't sleeping, then you were doing training or PT or whatever.
Eventually, you got selected to go to Ranger School, right?
Yes.
And how did that training differ from basic training?
It was a little bit rougher, I think. See, at the Indian Town Gap, they had two different, like, it wasn't just two different camps, but it was different. Okay, one unit, how can I say unit? Well, maybe one part of the division that was going to be sent over to Germany had different training that we did it for Rangers. Our training was a little bit tougher, and we knew we were going to Korea, and the other ones knew they were going to go to Germany. There was two different kind of sections there, and they had, we trained, part of it, we trained with some of those guys, but then most of it we were different training. It was like, see, a Ranger, if I can put it this way, is like the Green Beret. Okay, you heard of the Green Beret already, okay. All right, the Ranger is, you get a Ranger Beret. Okay, now, and this song that you hear, okay, 100 men will test today, but only 3 win the Green Beret. You heard of that already, okay. With the Rangers, 100 men will test today, but only 1 wins the Ranger Beret. So it's a little bit tougher. So I think about 1% of the Army can get into the Rangers. It's a tough outfit. It's equivalent to the top Marines. And I have a lot of respect for the Marines. I really do. A lot of respect for the Marines. They used to come past us once in a while over in Korea, and they'd holler out, that was a wolfhound. They'd holler out to us, we have no fear because the wolfhounds are near. And we'd yell right back at them, we have no fear because the Marines are near. So we had good communication with the Marines, always did. So I got a lot of respect for a Marine.
Do you know what kind of qualities that they look for in a recruit for the Rangers? Like, do you know why they picked you?
I don't know, maybe because I was always in trouble. I don't know. But see, if we had to do push-ups or anything like that, I could always outlast most everybody else. I don't know why, but physically I was in good shape. I was in real good shape physically, and I think maybe that, I don't know if that helped or not, but anyway, I made it into the Rangers, and it was good.
You first said last time we interviewed that you were first deployed to Japan, right? Am I right?
Yes.
And what exactly did you do in Japan?
I went to radio school.
And what is radio school?
Radio school was code, what you call CW. It's did it whatever, you know. Like I don't remember all the different like SOS I think was dash something like that, you know.
So Morse code?
Morse code
Yes.
is what it was called, Morse code, yes. And I knew that, but when I got to Korea, we didn't have, well, we had a little Morse code, but most of the radios were what we put on our back. It was talking to different units or different outfits or different board observer would talk on a radio, but in order, those radios didn't work like they do now. They would only work line of sight. Okay, so in order to talk to somebody on the other side of the hill, you had to have somebody up on top so he could relay a message to the guy down below on the other side. So it wasn't that you could turn your radio on and then talk to somebody on the other side of the hill, because there was no communication, and the radios didn't work that way years ago. Okay, so you have somebody out on the outpost that could relay a message. You would talk to the man on the outpost up on top of the hill, and he would relay a message to the other one. But what worked real good, we were in contact with the airplanes or the bombers or whatever, because that way they were up higher, see, and we could communicate with them. And what we had to do then is mark a spot where we wanted them to drop napalm or whatever. We'd have to have somebody up on the hill, or else with the radio, with the planes, P-51 especially, saved our butt all the time, because we could talk to them and we could see them guys, and they would be flying down below the hill once in a while. We could see them.
So, exactly how were you transported from America to Japan?
That was a long, drawn-out affair, okay? Years ago, there weren't any jets when we went over, okay? There were no jets at all, so we had we left at Camp Stolman in California, and we got it was like almost like a C-47, and there were just benches in the plane, and they flew us across because they figured they needed us over there in a hurry. They never finished my basic training because they put us on a troop train, which took 2 weeks to get from Pennsylvania to California, because every time a passenger train or something came by, they put us on a sidetrack. We were on a train about 2 weeks. So we got to Camp Stolman, California, and there they loaded us on some aircraft, and they were military, they call it MATS, M-A-T-S. And we flew from California to Hawaii, and from Hawaii to Wake Island, and from Wake Island to Japan. And when I got to Japan, my orders were changed, so that they sent me to radio school. And before I finished radio school, they sent us to Korea. But anyway, we were in the air. Air time, actually, flying time, was 36 hours.
Wow.
Sitting on a bench, you know, but we were pretty tough guys, you know. So, but anyway, it took us 36 hours, and then when we landed at Wake Island, I looked out this little porthole. I said, "They're never going to put this plane down there because the island wasn't that long." And when he touched down, it looked like he was touching down in the water. By the time he had stopped on Wake Island, we were right on the other side of the island, a real small island. And then they refueled there, and then we got on again. We were in Hawaii maybe an hour for refueling, and in Wake Island we were there maybe about an hour. But actually, flying time was 36 hours to get to Japan, Tokyo.
That's a long flight.
Yes, it was. Yeah, and all you could see was water underneath. You know.
So when you heard you were going to Korea, what was going through your mind?
Well, we were going there to fight. See, we heard that already when I went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. We knew we were going to Korea because they had two different sections in that Indiantown Gap training, basic training. And one group was going to go to Korea, and the other group was going to go to Germany. Okay, so I was in the group that went to Korea, or was going to Korea. Yeah. And we didn't. One thing, we didn't even ever heard of Korea. Nobody knew where Korea really was. You know? Because if you look on a map, it wasn't years and years ago in the geography books. It was called Chosun. It wasn't Korea.
Now, when you first landed in Korea, from what I've read, it's just like a jungle everywhere. Am I?
Well, it was mountains, mostly hills, mountains. Green, it was green, you know, except where it blew everything apart.
Yeah. But like coming, I don't know how, like Kiel, not exactly a wooded area. It's kind of flat too. I mean, you come from Kiel to Korea. Is it like a difference?
Oh yeah, it was altogether different country. It stunk like that. It really stunk, you know, because they fertilized everything with human waste. You know, all their rice paddies, and they had rice paddies all the way up down the hills. There were some flat areas where they, when the water run down the hills, okay, and there, see, rice grows in, I would say 8 to 10 to 12 inches of water. And that was all rice paddies all the way up some of the hills. Some pictures, I don't know where they are right now, but where you could see all the terraced hills all over.
Now, as you moved like up through South Korea, because you probably landed at the end of the peninsula, right?
Yes,
And
I
you-
landed at Busan, the most southern part of Korea.
Now, as you advanced through South Korea, like how did the South Koreans like welcome you? Did they want you there? Were they scared of you?
We saw very few civilians, and those that we saw were they were refugees. You know, they had whatever they could carry on their back, or they were going south. And the roads were so full of these refugees that you couldn't hardly get a jeep through there once in a while. And the Chinese would be shelling their own people that were on the roads, you know. And I mean, I felt sorry for the people because, like in winter, I saw kids walking and carrying their little brother or sister. They didn't have any shoes on or nothing, you know. Their feet were frozen. It was a real hell, and you couldn't help them out because you didn't have that much equipment to really help them. We gave them whatever we could, but you had to survive. So
Now, you said you got hit by a mortar round.
yeah,
In Korea, and then you spent some time in a
MASH hospital, yes,
What was that like?
hell.
How?
Yeah. They were when we got hit the first time. They took me in an ambulance to MASH hospital, and I'd say the stretchers that were laying there where guys were getting waited to get fixed up, patched up or whatever. But that area was bigger than this room. It was all stretchers, you know, where guys had gotten hit. Were waiting to get through this. Operating table was like this table here was their operating table. And they had a couple of lights. They had a generator going, and then everybody got their turn to get on this table that we operated on. That's all they had. That was MASH hospital. And guys were dying right out in the open. And stuff they were laying out in the open like a day like today, maybe raining, whatever. But there were so many guys that were waiting to get in the operating table. It was terrible. I felt pretty foolish because I just had my leg banged up, and guys were laying there with their arms off and legs off and all shot up, and I had to wait their turn. And these doctors and nurses, a lot of them were just ordinary people. I mean, one of the medics that helped me in was a guy from Kiel. I met him. And I asked him what he was doing there, and he said, I'm trying to patch up people. And he was just an ordinary, ordinary guy like me and you.
Have you ever seen the TV show MASH?
Yep.
Do you feel that represents what you saw? Do you feel it represents it in a realistic way?
There's no comparison. No. But I mean, they had a good movie, and the doctors and the nurses joked around just about like he did on the TV. But that, I think that's how they kept their sanity. It was bad news. And then what the Chinese did, well, they took me with an ambulance down to MASH Hospital. But anyway, they couldn't take me back to my unit because the Chinese blew up the ambulance. And I got pictures, I don't know if I have them here or not, but they blew up the ambulance.
Your commanding officers, your commanders and all that, did you look up to them, or was it?
No, I didn't. I didn't have any respect for, the only respect I had for one guy or two guys was General MacArthur and then Captain Lewis Millet. Lewis Millet was a captain, and he was a leader. It was all rifle and bayonet with him. You had to have your bayonet so sharp that you could shave with it. And he got the Medal of Honor. If you ever want to look somebody up, look up Captain Lewis Millet. I think he died a couple of years ago, but he was a leader. He wasn't a guy, he was the kind of guy, he's the kind of guy that would say, there's 500 Chinese up there and we're going to get them. And he said, you guys follow me. He didn't say, well, you guys go up there and I'll lead you from here. He was the head of the squad or patrol or regiment, whatever. And I had a lot of respect for him because he had a red handlebar. He was out there to fight. He was out there to win. He wasn't pussyfooting around like.
So soldiers respect a man who is willing to fight. Then.
Yes, very definitely. Yes,
They'll
yes, sir.
follow.
Yeah. They'll go anybody. A soldier will go. Anybody that's a leader, a soldier will follow. Yeah, and they'll fight. That's right. They will. And Captain Lewis Millet was a fighter, and we had a lot. He was an easy company to Wolfhounds. So got the Medal of Honor for what he did. I don't know how many he killed, but I think about 60 of them I heard once.
You weren't there at the battle at the hill where he got his Medal of Honor?
No,
No?
no, I wasn't, no. But I was in the same unit with him.
You served with the Rangers, and I read. Did you ever serve with the Marines? Because I read somewhere that there were some Marines that came over to Korea.
Oh, yes, a lot of them, yes. I had a lot of respect for the Marines, because we fought right next to them, and the Marines were good fighters. Very, very good, very good. I got a lot of respect for a Marine. Every time I see a Marine, I will shake his hand and thank him for what he's doing for my country. Marines were good men, yes. Well trained. They were equivalent to, I would say, the Rangers. They were good. Marines were good. Saw a lot of Marines over there.
Now, in the first few months of the war, it's said that the United States didn't put full effort into it because they didn't know the Chinese were involved, and they
Right.
thought North Korea wasn't going to fight back that hard. But would you say when the Marines came, you knew it was a turning point? Like they were.
Well, I don't just say it was a turning point because the Marines lost almost everybody they had over there at first, called it at the Chosin Reservoir. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Okay, there's only a chosen few, and those are the ones that were left because they almost got wiped out because they brought the Chinese in.
Now, in the war, it was a lot of mortar strikes and bombing strikes and everything.
Yes.
Did you ever like call in a mortar strike towards like just like something or like?
Oh, yeah. You mean like calling on the radio?
Yeah.
Tell 'em, okay. Yeah, okay. With the airplane, with the planes too. You know, you call in and say, okay, give us a few rounds and we'll see once where the shells land. Okay. And then you say, okay, 1,000 feet to the left or to the right or ahead or whatever. And a mortar goes, a mortar is something like, okay, if you want to hit something like say from here to the fire department, just take, for instance, about 3-4 blocks maybe, okay. A mortar goes up, goes down, okay. Artillery is long range. Artillery, our artillery unit was about 15 miles behind the lines. But artillery is flatter. A lot of times you couldn't get artillery in over a hill or mountain or whatever you had. Where a mortar you could, because the mortar goes straight up and then comes down. You can't hear a mortar. You can't hear them. It's just that thump when it goes off, and you don't hear it. But artillery whistles like hell. I mean, artillery really whistles. You can hear them long ways away, but if you're right in line with an artillery shell, you can see it. You can see it going. But it's flat. It's flatter. But you can't get in over the top. And most of our hills were so steep that we used mortars most of the time. But then you had to have somebody up on top of the hill also to direct the fire. So the guys down below wouldn't know where to shoot.
Letters. You wrote letters.
Yeah, we wrote letters whenever we had a chance. But most of the time you wanted to sleep because, you know, like you're going like, one time I know we were going for 72 hours without a break. And then if the mail guy got through, you know, you have to crawl through a lot of stuff once in a while, and then you find out that this guy wasn't around anymore, that guy. And anyway, those guys that delivered the mail to us were a good guy, really good. I mean, they risked their life every minute to get you some mail. And then if you had a chance to write, which we usually had about every 3 weeks, they tried to give us a little, what we call a reserve area. They tried to give us a break so you could shave and clean up and maybe take a shower, whatever, and write a letter home. And then when you did get a letter, most of the time it was somebody was bitching at you because you didn't write home, you know. I wrote many a letter on my helmet and you had to do it in the daytime because, you know, everything is dark at night, you know, except for the artillery fire that, I know one guy said one time, he read his letter from home by the flashing of the artillery because there was so much artillery going on. And that's a big flash, you know, that lights up the sky. It was hard to write a letter. And then those days, a lot of times you wrote it with a pencil because the ballpoints, the pens you had one in your pocket, you know, but a lot of times they were frozen, you know, so they didn't write anyway. So you try and write with a pencil, you didn't write on the helmet and try and keep that clean. And then it would rain or snow or something. It was a bitch writing. I mean, I know one time I think I had, I didn't hear from home for 3-4 months maybe, I think. And then anyway, one time I got 52 letters at one time. And then you decide, should you read the last one first or the other ones? So, and then it was raining out like a bitch. So I stuck them in my helmet. Then by the time you read the last ones, they were all soaked up anyway, you know, so you never know what the heck. was a lot of times what they wrote, so, and then usually the first thing that was on the letter was, how come you didn't write, I mean, how the hell are you gonna write when you're sitting in a foxhole or something that's got 3 feet of water in it, and how are you gonna keep paper dry in order to write a letter home? So, but that's all part of being over there.
So is that something you everyone look forward to, like getting the letters?
Oh, man, mail, I tell you, that, when we heard that the mailman, or the mail guy that delivered the mail, I tell you, we opened up with everything we had to keep that guy safe. I mean, that, we call in artillery, and all the mortars will fire as fast as you can, because the mailman is, yeah, I tell you, the machine guns got pretty hot once in a while when we knew that the mailman was crawling up to our outfit. Yeah.
So when you were in the, was it the recreation? Was it, what did you call it, that area?
Reserve area.
Reserve area.
Yeah.
So like, well, you would clean up, you would eat, sleep, write letters and everything in that?
If you could, yes. Yeah.
That was one day you got?
No, usually they tried to give you a whole week, but most of the time we were called back out within 2 or 3 days. But it was a good feeling if you knew you were going to reserve area, because then you could shit, shine, shave, and shower, and they had a latrine there where you didn't have to either go in your helmet or whatever, and then you had a lot of times they had, we had candles most of the time for light, but a couple of reserve areas, we had a generator where they had lights that you could ride at night, but it was maybe 10, 15 miles behind the main line. But the artillery was so fierce then too that you'd be riding, and then artillery would go off, and you couldn't ride straight then because the ground shook. I mean, you get these big howitzers going, and they're firing steady for a while. It's hard to ride. But it was a good feeling because you knew you could get a shower and you could shave and stuff like that. I mean, we looked like a bunch of rats. Well, most of the kids that were with me weren't old enough to shave yet, so a lot of them didn't have to shave yet. They were too young. Like the average age in my squad was 17 and a half. The rest of them were all younger. Most of them were younger. I had a lot of guys over there with me that were from the hills in Kentucky and Tennessee, and I think I had 3 in my squad that never had shoes until they got there. They were like hillbillies, but they were good. They were sharpshooters. They were good guys. But young kids, because down there they couldn't get a job either, and jobs were hard to come at that time, so they enlisted in the army. Forged some papers, and my communication sergeant was only 17. He was my sergeant. A bunch of young guys, but they were good fighters. I tell you, they were good.
But with that mortar, the mortar or the artillery, you were comparing it like being out in Lake Michigan, firing over to Oshkosh?
Oh, yeah, that was the Battleship Wisconsin.
And last summer we were at a dance, and then a guy came up to Donnie, and apparently he was on one of those ships that was sending out the mortar rounds or whatever.
Shells, 16-inch shells on the battleship.
You can tell me the rest.
Well, okay, we had the Battleship Wisconsin out in by the what we call the Punch Bowl area. It was about a 5-mile square area. It was flat. There were mountains all the way around. The Chinese were on the north side, and we were on the south side. But anyway, this battleship with the 16-inch guns could shoot 30 miles. It was, like I explained, it would be like having the battleship in Lake Michigan and hitting a target in Oshkosh. That's how far their shells would travel. They, I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but I think each shell weighed about 2,500 pounds, each shell. And I think they had 500 pounds of TNT, or gunpowder, behind each one. Okay? For that shell out there, okay. The battleship had 9 shells like that, 9 guns. Okay? And what we do, we would call in, call in for 1 round to see about where that shell would land. Okay? All right, and then they say, okay, quarter mile to the north or quarter mile to the south or whatever, in further or whatever. So then we call for a broadside. That means they would fire all 9 guns at one time once they hit the target, okay? Well, when those 9 shells came in, they made a hole where I bet you could set this whole school into that hole when they all came in at one time. But it was always, and they would whistle, and they would, and you could hear them coming from a long ways away. And they said that when they fired all 9 at one time, that would move that big 100,000-ton battleship 8 inches back in the water from the recoil. So that was something, boy, I tell you. And that battleship saved our life just like the P-51 planes did. So we were lucky to have that. We never saw the ship, never saw it. And then a while back, then I talked to somebody, he had a veteran shirt on, and I talked to him, and he was a gun pointer on the battleship. So I probably talked to him over the radio and never even knew the guy, you know. So, but that was awesome, really. I mean,
Yeah, someone told us to ask you about Dick Bauer, I think it was.
Richard Bauer, yeah. I went to high school with him at it was a middle school. And now it's middle school, but that was our high school. And Dick Bauer was a real good kid. He was a good football player, and we never ever heard if he really was killed, but he's missing in action to this day. We never found anything from him or with him, and we didn't know if he got captured or. The last guy to see him was Roman Bondi. Dick's tank was burning, and he saw Richard running down a hill. That's the last anybody ever heard of him or saw him.
Roman Bondi was the last.
Roman Bondi
That's
was
my
the
grandpa.
That's your grandpa. He was the last. So maybe you could check out with him sometime once. But that's just what I heard. I didn't hear it from Roman himself, but that's what I heard. Roman Bondi was the last one to see him.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So okay.
We were told to how did you guys? Something about the moon, like how it affected you somehow, or?
Well, yeah. See, we always had to go on night patrols, and if the moon was out, that was always bad news because they could see us, but we could see them too. But if the moon was out bright, you know, it illuminated everything, especially if there was snow on the ground. And we always hated to see the moon. And to this day, when I see the moon, it just gives me the shivers once in a while because I think of going out on night patrol and the moon coming out, and you know doggone well that one of us wasn't going to be coming back, you know, because they could see us too.
So it was like this. It was kind of like the sun was a good thing and the moon was a bad thing.
Yeah, well, at night, you know, you didn't have any lights or anything, and if the moon would come out, well, you could see anybody walking. And if the moon was out bright, you know, the silhouettes and stuff. So it was always bad news. And when we went out on night patrol, you always look around at your squad or whoever was going out there, and you knew somebody wasn't going to come back. You know? So we never carried stretchers. We always put them right in our ponchos and put a knot on each end and carry either wounded or dead back. The moon is something that I know it's for honeymooners, I guess, but, or whatever, but anyhow, when I see the moon coming out full bright, I still think about stuff like that.
Why'd you always put the windshield down on your Jeep?
Oh, well, we put the windshields down because, and we covered them up so there would be no reflection, because everything had to be dark, pitch dark. There was no, well, we had flashlights, but otherwise there were no lights, never. You could never turn the lights on if you were driving at night. We had these little, what we call cat eyes, and you could see another vehicle from the cat eyes, because a lot of times with all the noise, you couldn't hear them. But there was like cat eyes, and you always knew if there was a vehicle coming. And they didn't shine actually for that you could see where you were driving, but it was a sign that you could see another vehicle. You know, within, I think you would light up about 15, 20 feet, something like that. And we call them cat eyes, and that's about what they look like. There was two of them on each side of the vehicle, so it didn't hit another vehicle. Very seldom there was a vehicle on the road, but every once in a while maybe meet a tank or a Jeep or a truck or something.
Now, how did you handle holidays, being away from,
We didn't know it was a holiday,
you just,
except Christmas, you know. But otherwise, there was no holidays. There were no Sundays or anything like that. And when we went to Mass, they usually had, it was hardly ever on a Sunday, but the priest would set up, he had 2 beer cans and he had a candle in each one, and then he said Mass on the hood of a Jeep, usually on the hood of a Jeep. And that was good. And the only thing we did, we took our helmets off when we went to Mass, but otherwise we had our rifles and everything along. We were fully equipped. And there was hardly ever a sermon. Mass maybe lasted 10, 15 minutes at the most, because usually if they knew the Chinese knew there was a bunch of guys around, they'd start shelling right away. So it didn't last long, but we were glad we had somebody to pray for us.
so one day just sort of blended into the next, you really didn't,
We didn't know what day of the week it was. A lot of times we didn't know if it was Sunday or Monday, and well, some guys had a calendar, but that didn't really mean nothing, because most of the times anybody had a calendar was in like a reserve area. Reserve area was an area where about every 2 or 3 weeks they'd try and get us to a place where we could, no place was safe, but it was safer, and it was about a mile or so behind the artillery, where you could take a shower and clean up, and that was a rest area. And then we'd get called out from this rest area to go different sectors again for wherever they needed the wolfhounds. That's where they put us. And